Hi, welcome to the first video of my new series where I just scribble a bunch of notes on the screen and then talk about every single thing in the Slay the Spire compendium, one per video. Today I want to talk about Bash a little bit. Bash is a starter card for the Ironclad deck. Ironclad deck starts with 10 cards and Bash is one of them, so you're going to draw it every other turn at the start of the run. Pretty much. It's a 2 energy attack, which is a fairly significant thing, actually. At the start of a run, you often want to be able to turn all of your energy into damage. If you're trying to kill Gremlin Knob, you really want to turn your energy into damage. If you're trying to kill Lagavulin, you have that turn where Lagavulin is going to debuff you. You really want to be able to turn all of your energy into damage. In the sentries fight, they start dazing you and stuff, so you really want to kill them early. You want to turn all of your energy into damage. And so the fact that Ironclad starts with a 2-cost attack makes it a little bit easier for him to turn all of his energy into damage, and also makes it so that 0-cost attacks are a little bit more appealing. Stuff like Anger early on is very good on Ironclad because you already are drawing hands where 3 energy can go into attacking, and that extra attack which you can play for 0 actually does something. Whereas on Silent, if you add Slice to your deck, often you'll draw the Slice but you didn't have 3 energy worth of attacks anyway, for example. Bash makes things vulnerable, which is a really big deal. It means that Ironclad's attacks are better than Silence attacks, for example. They are going to deal an extra 50% damage. And it's also a really good upgrade. Bash upgrades to deal 10 damage and apply 3 vulnerable. And going from 2 to 3 vulnerable seems like a 50% increase in vulnerable, but it's actually even more, because on the turn where you apply the vulnerable, you only have 1 energy left in Act 1. And so you get 1 energy of vulnerable that turn, 3 energy of vulnerable the next turn for 4 total. If you have 3 turns, you get another 3 energy of vulnerable. The next turn, you end up with 7 energy of vulnerable. So it's a 75% increase instead of a 50% increase in terms of how much energy you have available to hit things while they're vulnerable, which is pretty sweet. The not so great stuff about Bash, well, one not so great thing about Bash is that it conflicts with a lot of Ironclad's very good early game cards. Clothesline and Uppercut, I wouldn't even say those are the best ones, but Carnage just deals a truckload of damage. Carnage costs 2, and there are a few other Ironclad cards that cost 2. If you're on 3 energy, you're not going to be able to play 2 cards which each cost 2 in the same turn, unless you have an energy potion or some extenuating thing letting you do that. And so the fact that Bash exists, and there are a bunch of other 2-cost attacks that Ironclad really likes, I didn't even mention Immolate for what it's worth, makes Sneckoeye a lot better going into Act 2, makes getting the 4th energy from the Act 1 boss quite important sometimes, and it also, in my opinion, makes boss relic swapping pretty good on Ironclad. I think Ironclad is maybe the best or second best character to be boss swapping on. I don't personally enjoy boss relic swapping very much, and so I don't necessarily do that in my runs, but if you're just trying to maximize your win rate, I think that grabbing a boss relic swap on Ironclad makes a ton of sense because it lets you get into so many more situations where you can play 2 2-cost attacks in the same turn, and it's such a big deal to be able to do that early in the game. It's worth noting that Bash is very good against Lagavulin and Gremlin Knob because both of them are just incredibly susceptible to vulnerable, but it's not very good at all against the sentries. Sentries start with an artifact charge, and also there are 3 different ones, so if you apply 2 vulnerable to one of them, you haven't successfully applied it to the other 2. It just means that sometimes Ironclad struggles with the sentries fight early, but that's still solvable. You've got all sorts of reasonable area of effect damage cards. You've also got enough front-loaded damage that you can just burst one of the sentries down pretty well with Ironclad. So there are all sorts of solutions, but it's something to keep in mind that maybe you need to spend a little bit more effort on getting the sentries fight under control compared to the other 2. Typically, as the run goes on, Bash becomes a little bit less relevant unless you get like a Necronomicon or a Champion's Belt or something interesting happens like that, maybe a Sneckoeye. It's very unusual to remove Bash from your deck though. The fact that it applies to vulnerable makes it more appealing than a strike pretty much always. It's going to be able to chew through an artifact charge in some fights where that's very important. For example, against the Heart, you really want to be able to get rid of 2 artifact charges on turn like 4 or 5 so that you can get a disarm played against the Heart quite often. And so just having access to that debuff is a pretty big deal. The other thing that I wrote down here that I wanted to mention is that Bash often leads you toward a deck which deals a lot of damage using its energy to play attacks for Ironclad. That's definitely not the only way to deal damage with Ironclad by any stretch of the imagination. You've got like Juggernaut as a big option. You've got Combust, which does tons and tons of damage. But starting with this high energy cost attack, which applies vulnerable, which makes your other attacks, which have big numbers on them and so probably cost a lot of energy, significantly better, does lead to you sometimes sitting in runs where you have a bunch of energy to spend on attacks and you don't have very much energy left over to spend on defense. And so if you're in that sort of situation, one of the biggest tools that you have to round your deck out is Corruption, which makes it so all of your skills cost 0. And I just wanted to shout out Corruption because I think it's sort of cool to see how just this one starter card can immediately start to cascade toward you being in a situation where that rare power that makes all of your skills cost 0 is a really big deal. Cool. Hope you enjoyed the chat about Bash.